Welcome to the Wisdom Check by Tabletop to Keyboard. This is going to be our bi-weekly podcast where we discuss things such as Dungeons and Dragons. Actually, I think maybe we need to turn up my mic a little bit, guys. How about some more game?
More game. This is the Wisdom Check. This is the intro to end all intros. Talk about Dungeons, Dragons, and
Now, I don't think that's proper. This is a family show after all. This is the intro we can use, fellas. It's good, clean fun for everyone. Welcome to the Wisdom Check, where we have wholesome conversations about the dilemmas we face every day.
Nah, hold on a second. I got your intro right here. Yeah, that's better. Welcome to the Wisdom Check. Well, I'm right, Jeff's wrong. We're gonna have guests on to talk about it. It's gonna be awesome. Because I said so.
He is right. He did say so. I don't know. Is surf music the best music for a podcast about D&D?
Fuck yeah.
Okay.
This just in, nobody can agree on our intro for this podcast. So we're just going to start. Welcome to the Wisdom Check. Roll for initiative. Fuck. A 1. It's like every time.
Every time. Welcome, everybody, to the Wisdom Check. It's another Monday night. Thank you for joining us. I am Dustin. With me, as always, over there is Jeff on the other side of the screen. Say hi, Jeff.
Hey, howdy do.
And coming with us today, the Wisdom Check, we have Alex. Alex, go ahead and say hi to everybody.
Hi, I'm Alex. I guess I'm a streaming dungeon master and tabletop RPG writer and novelist. Just here to chat with these guys about whatever's going on.
Oh, yeah.
That's
Just a few things under your belt.
Cool. I'm a busy guy.
Sounds like it.
So why don't you go ahead and start off by telling us a little bit about how busy you are these days. What do you got running at the moment?
Sure. So my most recent project that I could talk about is I was involved with the Rogues Gallery book for Mutants and Masterminds. Basically just a collection of supervillains that could be dragged and dropped into any ongoing Mutants and Masterminds campaign. I work with New Millennium Games, which is an indie game publisher. I do all of their Mutants and Masterminds conversions for their line of products. And I've got a couple of projects I'm working on right now that I'm not allowed to talk about, but they're a lot of fun.
I mean, you got some NDAs out there, huh?
Yeah, some NDAs, but I hope I'll be able to share some stuff soon because I actually just hit that deadline yesterday.
Oh, very cool.
Oh, cool. Well, we'll look
What kind of
forward
timeline are you looking at on that, for release dates on that secret projects?
I don't know. They don't let the freelancers know too much about that. They like to underpromise so they can overachieve.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, I guess the question is, how did you get into that in the first place? I mean, it sounds like a pretty sweet deal.
Mostly through dumb luck.
Yeah, the best kind.
So I was running a Mutants and Masterminds event at Origins Game Fair a few years ago. And it was the year that Steve Kenson was the guest of honor. And Origins at that time had a program where they would stick the guest of honor into games by lottery. And he got stuck into my game.
Wow.
And it was a game that I literally only had player character sheets for. I didn't have any prep other than a sentence in the event book is what was going on. So I had that sentence and I had an episode of Justice League Unlimited that I was spoofing off of. And he sat down, he played Deadshot in my game, and he had an amazing time. And afterwards I hooked up with him and I was like, hey, I would love to do this for real. And he got me in touch with his editor and I've been there ever since. It's been about 8 years now I've been freelancing with Green Ronin.
Wow.
That's really cool.
That is an incredible story.
You never know more dumb luck than I was imagining. Like everyone always says, like, yeah, it was a stroke of luck, but like that really was like completely out of your hands, wasn't it?
Yeah, I had no preconceived notions going into that convention that anything like that was going to happen.
It's crazy. So I guess you just never know what you're signing up for when you decide to do one of those things, right? You just never know what's going to walk through the door.
So always have your A face on.
Always. So how'd you get into gaming itself? Like, if you want to go back, where'd you start out with gaming?
Yeah, my dad was a huge D&D player growing up, and he would always go over to his friend's house and not bring any of the kids with him. And he was always doing this mysterious thing where they were wizards and rogues, and they were heading off to, vanquish princesses and steal castles and stuff like that. And
this is a perfect move.
He bought the 3rd edition starter set for my brother and my friends and I, and he said, once you guys learn how to play with each other, then you'll be allowed to come play with us, because he didn't like teaching anybody anything. And we all sat down, we opened up the 3rd edition starter kit. My friends all took player character sheets before I could grab one, and they said, hey, you're going to be the dungeon master, good luck. And I've been stuck in that seat ever since.
Well, hopefully you enjoyed it at this point.
Yeah, I do quite enjoy being a dungeon master. I have some trouble being a player just because I always feel like I'm being more judgmental than I should be.
Oh, really? Well, is it people in your own group that you're, it's like their first time running games, or is it just that, you would have done it differently?
Usually I would have done it differently.
Mm-hmm.
And it's usually I'm softer on people who I know, but usually at a convention or anything, I have really high standards because I BS'd my way into a career.
So what was the game like?
Go ahead, Jeff. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. What was the game like that you ended up ad-libbing there? It sounds like.
So it was a Suicide Squad game. That was what the event was for. It was Suicide Squad all on the Watchtower, because all my Suicide Squad games I like to name after old songs.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I did it before Guardians of the Galaxy did. But it was based on the Justice League episode where the Suicide Squad had to sneak into the Justice League Watchtower and steal something from them. They had to go to this museum in the desert that the Justice League's regular employees used to teleport up to the Watchtower to do like maintenance work and stuff like that. And while they were waiting in the desert, they sent Clayface in to scout the area out, and he took the whole tour and came back with a goodie bag while they were all sitting in the desert.
Wow.
And it ended up with Deadshot, using his death wish to jump into the arms of Amazo and blow himself up and save the Suicide Squad and the Earth from what was going to happen with the Watchtower. It was a crazy adventure.
Now, for anyone who's not familiar, the Watchtower is a Justice League satellite base, right? Like, it hovers up over the Earth, and they had to go on a space mission to this satellite base. Then is what, just to give people a little context who maybe aren't familiar with Justice League lore, I guess. Yeah,
they had to sneak into the teleporter that would let them go into space and steal from Batman and Superman and Wonder Woman.
Wow.
Yeah, not an easy task at all. So explains how you had Deadshot in your game.
Yeah, I think it was Deadshot and Clayface and Harley Quinn and Captain Cold, I think, was the group.
Oh,
wow.
Yeah, they were not prepared.
No. I mean, I don't know if there's a such thing as being prepared to go steal from the Justice League.
No.
It's like a whole nother level of things you just don't do, right? So
yeah, no, not at all.
So before you got involved with Mutants and Masterminds, did you play any other superhero RPGs? Did you do like the old school Marvel RPG, any of those other game systems?
M&M was my first one. I always wanted to get involved with a superhero RPG because superheroes growing up were always my favorite genre of fiction, but I couldn't find a group that would do it with me. All of my friends wanted to play fantasy.
Right.
And I wound up having to go online to a website called inferno.net, which was sort of it was a virtual tabletop similar to Roll20, but I think it's defunct now. And I found a group that let me join into their M&M game, and I rolled up my first superhero, and I was hooked. It was, I don't know, I like that in a superhero RPG you can there's so much variety, and you're not limited to a class, and you're allowed to sort of explore. You're allowed to explore the character you want to be instead of the character that you are going to be eventually.
Oh, that's
an interesting philosophy.
You're talking about like the progression element.
Yeah. Yeah, like a lot of superhero RPGs, your character sort of starts off awesome, and you tweak them a little bit here and there. It's not a story of starting off with nothing and growing to a certain point. You're more free to explore what matters to the character on an individual and a personal level is what I sort of appreciate about playing superhero RPGs.
Huh. That's interesting. So what kind of characters do you typically play?
It varies. I love paragons. Superman has always been one of my favorite superheroes, so I really enjoy taking on sort of that guardian role, but I think magic users will probably always be my soft spot. Yeah. I like Dr. Fate, I like Constantine, I like Doctor Strange. A lot of PhDs in the super sorcerer world.
So even in a superhero game, you're still playing the wizard. You're still going with the wizard class. Is that true in fantasy too? Do you flip over to wizard when you go fantasy?
Wizard or bard usually. But I mean, I've worn glasses since I was 2 years old, so I'm used to getting beat up by people who are bigger than me and having to run and hide behind other people.
So not looking for any fantasy, just straight realism.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So in terms of, I guess, of you're saying it's less about progression, it's more about what the character is doing. Do you find yourself gravitating in any particular arcs, or is that also something that's kind of wide open for you?
That's very wide open for me. I like I just like seeing what the character does. I mean, that's something that has happened in my writing a lot. Is I'll start with a character in a bad place, and I'll see how they get out of it. Or I'll start with somebody who has emotional growth that needs to happen before they can finally unlock their true potential. Like the main character in my novel he's a drunk immortal wizard who used to be the chosen one, and then his prophecy came true, and he didn't know what to do with himself after that.
Huh. Nice. He used to be a star quarterback, and now, what you going to do? Just live on past life.
That was 80 years ago.
Do you find that's a problem with the superhero genre when you have people making characters for your games? Because you say you mostly DM. So when people are playing in your games, do you find that they have a problem making characters that have emotional growth left to be done?
Sometimes. I think it depends on where they're coming from a player background. I have a lot of players who come to my superhero games from a D&D background or from, a fantasy loot the dungeon, get the treasure, become better background. And sometimes they have a little bit of trouble with knowing that they can start sort of at the end of their power journey, but still have room for their personal journey to go. But then I do get a lot of players who are superhero specific players who they watch the latest Netflix show or they watch the latest CW show and they see all of that sort of Dawson's Creek drama stuff going on, and that's what draws them to the genre.
Well, we're living in sort of a golden age of comic book superheroes between the Marvel movies, the DC movies, all the DC TV shows on the CW. You got all these, what is it? Amazon put out, was it The Boys? Yeah, I mean, there's everywhere you turn around. The Watchmen's now out on HBO, just started this week. Like superheroes are literally everywhere. So do you think that we're sort of maybe starting to head in towards a golden age of superhero tabletop RPGs? Like, are we seeing more of them start to come out of the woodwork?
I hope so. I feel like a lot of the tabletop RPG bandwidth is being taken up by D&D right now, even with
for sure.
Even with the pop culture media sort of being, the zeitgeist being the superheroes. I think a lot of people use sort of like the superhero story as a basis for what they want to make in a fantasy setting. So we see a lot of characters who are moving away from fantasy tropes and are becoming more like anime or superhero inspired kinds of characters, but they're still being viewed through that fantasy lens. I know D&D is winning by like a wide margin. I don't know if it's even a competition anymore with D&D. I think it's just figuring out how to best serve your niche and get out of their way.
Well, yeah, it's different players.
The most competition there is for D&D is Pathfinder, probably, and it's still, if you strip down the name off the book, it's still D&D.
Yeah, that's just really, D&D 0.5.
it's D&D with a lot more rules. Like, that's what it is at the moment. So,
And there have been a whole lot of indie superhero titles that have come out recently. I know about Icons that Steve Kenson put out that's sort of like a rules light accompaniment to Mutants and Masterminds. I'm going to be playing that with him at UConn here in November, and I'm really excited to get the chance to play with him as a DM. But you also see stuff like Paragons or Prowlers and Paragons and the V&V stuff. And there's a lot of superhero stuff out. But I think we're having trouble finding a narrative for the genre, because a lot of the stuff that comes out for superhero stuff is just characters and rule books. There's not a lot of adventure paths, which I don't know if that's a problem with the genre or if that's a problem with just the drive-through RPG business model.
That's interesting.
Yeah. A lot of creators don't make adventures because making an adventure is just selling a product to 1 out of 5 or 6 players, because only one person's the DM. And they can't sell that book to the whole group. They can only sell the book to the person leading the group.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I guess that's kind of true. Like, I know some people who are just avid collectors, but again, most of those people are in the D&D realm. So, like, they start collecting 5e books. They'll buy every module that comes out, whether they're a DM, a player, or otherwise. Like, I personally wouldn't want to own the book if I was going to be playing in the adventure, because I'd be too tempted to read ahead.
Yeah, for sure. Oh my god, I held off on running Curse of Strahd for so long because I wanted to play Curse of Strahd.
Right. No, but you finally got a choice. You finally got a chance. You're now getting to run it, correct?
Yeah,
so.
I'm running it now. I really wanted to play it because Gothic horror is like right up my alley. It's right my jam. But I guess that's probably why it's better for me to be running it than playing it.
Yeah, set the tone correctly and all that.
'Tis the season. This is the right time of year for Strahd to make his way back around.
Oh yeah,
no doubt about it. Coinciding with Halloween, hopefully. Yeah. So you were talking about earlier that there's you're seeing a certain style of story that is specific to superheroes. Now, beyond powers and whatnot, I'm assuming that you're talking about narrative structure, the sorts of elements that occur in a story that's superhero based as opposed to fantasy. What are you identifying as those particular differences?
Well, there's a couple of tropes that show up in superhero stories that would have a hard time translating in tabletop RPGs, period, but are completely unthinkable in D&D. One thing that always happens in a superhero story is the villain wins the first fight. And that hardly ever happens in tabletop role-playing games.
We've discussed previously on the show how hard it is to put your big bad end guy out there and have him walk away from any kind of encounter. Like, that no matter what genre you're playing, that is a near impossible task.
Yeah, because the players don't want to let him go.
Nope.
And they don't want to run away.
And usually there's somebody in the group, be it archery or something, that has the ability to shoot for 900 miles, and you cannot just simply get away.
I hit him with a grasping arrow. He can't run away.
Right, yeah.
Guys, I'm trying to have a moment here.
And you'll even use a hologram.
You'll even stack the deck in your favor with him and be like, well, he's only going to fail on a 1 to 5, and sure enough, you'll roll a 4 or something stupid when you do that. Like, it's just going to happen.
It's only when you say it out loud that's what conjures that magic into the universe.
Truth. It is. It truly is.
So yeah, the hero losing the first confrontation is something that has a very difficult time translating to tabletop RPGs. And I think a lot of superhero stories right now, we're sort of moving away from it finally, but a lot of superhero stories are origin stories. And
most of them, yeah.
It's hard to do an origin story for each player character at the table.
Yeah. Is that the background, though? Is that where you say write your origin story, then come in as a group? Like,
you would hope, but then some people don't put as much work into it as the other people, so it winds up not feeling like a true background story. There's what I usually do when I have time, when I start a new game, is I'll have a session 0 where we'll sit down and we'll talk about what kind of game we want to tell, what kind of stories we want the characters to go through. And I have the heroes sort of bounce ideas off of each other because I want everybody to be present there, because I want them to feel like they're part of a team and feel like they all belong to the same story. Like, you don't want a whole bunch of colorful, wonderful characters showing up and then Wolverine coming to stab everybody just because he didn't talk with, didn't talk to Iceman and Kitty Pryde before he made his character.
There's always one.
Yeah, there is always one. But, at least if they're all making it together, they can coordinate. And then I'll usually, after that session 0, I'll usually let them know that the first session is going to be like everybody gets a half hour to basically go over their origin story and have a little personal scene before we even start setting up like the overarching story. And then I usually I plan my games out as sort of like seasons from a CW show where it's going to be like 24 episodes. There's going to be a lot of villains of the week, but there's going to be that overarching story, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say. Now, if you're talking like a season on CW, they specifically write in 3 to 4 episode arcs. Do you do that as well? Is it like this is season 1, but like the first 3 games is going to be this mini arc with some like things that feed into the bigger, 24 episode arc? Like, do you do it that way? Yeah, that kind of.
I will do stuff like that. I'll also have one-off episodes that are just like self-contained little Monster of the Week stories. And I'll usually have like the big bad guy planned out before I start writing out the story, but I won't fully introduce him to the heroes until about halfway through. Occasionally I will do like a little throwaway scene at the end of the first episode, just so that they have sort of a hint as to what's going to be going on. But I don't know if you guys saw any of Heroes Incorporated that we just wrapped up a couple weeks ago. That was the stream we did over on Geek Unleashed. That was a Mutants and Masterminds stream that I was running. Hades was their big bad guy, but I think for most of the run, they assumed it was a different villain who was messing with them on behalf of Hades.
Huh.
So they built up this big personal relationship with that henchman villain, and then they had their sort of mid-season triumph over him, and then they found out that he was just working for somebody else.
Nice. Classic.
The old bait and switch.
yeah, it's all superhero stuff. If you watch enough superhero stories, you sort of see where the beats line up, and I think players want to have the trope show up because they love this genre for a lot of the same reasons that we love this genre.
No, it's interesting because I don't know, when I'm looking at D&D games and stuff that we played, I think there's been a lot of influence from comics just based on the people that are in our group. Our primary DM is heavily into comics. Dustin was into comics growing up. So like, I don't know if it was necessarily that those ideas just kind of bled in and became our D&D style, but I feel like there's a lot of crossover. Like the things that are in there, oftentimes your origin stories, coming of age, dealing with acquisition of power, maturity, those kinds of concepts. And then, in terms of tabletop, because there's the nature of always having a group, you're always a team of characters as opposed to an individual. That already, to me, feels a little bit more D&D like.
Well, but I mean, most of your comics are built around groups. The Avengers, the Justice League, like those things have been there for a long time. Like the X-Men. Like most of your groups within do eventually they all start out as individuals, but eventually they do formulate these teams. The problem is always scaling the threat level big enough and make it still interesting to make all of them come together and it not be like the world's ending every Tuesday on stream, basically. Like that's the hard part is.
Yeah, scope is the challenge, I imagine.
Yeah, escalating of challenges. That is definitely. I don't know what I'm going to do for season 2 of Heroes Incorporated because Earth got sucked into the underworld at the end of that one. They had to bring Earth back to the prime material plane.
Wow.
So I guess I got to destroy the solar system next season.
Yeah, just call in Sephiroth. It'll be fine.
That's the thing. It's like it's like they say about Marvel. Where do you go after Thanos? Right? Like, what do you do now? Like, what do you got for Phase 4? It's a hard thing to figure out. I think that's really the struggle for DMing a superhero style game is figuring out. That's, in my opinion, that's the struggle that you don't have with fantasy necessarily. Like you can see it in fantasy, but I don't feel like it's quite the same. Like I think it takes. Oh, Fruitzilla's here. Welcome, Fruit. It's good to see you show up, buddy.
Hey, buddy. Thanks for the rain of subscriptions.
The rain
there.
of gifted subs are coming in.
Thank you, Fruitzilla.
He's up to
that is
120 in total. Wow.
Yep.
That is something I talk about a lot when I talk about designing for superhero stories. I say that louder isn't always better. Because there are so many superhero stories in the genre that detail the destruction of cities, planets, even universes. And they certainly have stakes, but they tend to lack a relatability that a smaller story could elicit from players. It's important to be able to offer a range of adventures for many different styles of gameplay. And knowing that those quiet moments can be just as momentous as the destruction of the universe. I mean, you can only shoot so many blue beams into the sky before the players start tuning out.
Yeah, and I think everybody's completely over the trope of giant vortex forms above city. Like, I'm pretty sure that's been beat to death to the point nobody wants to see that in any format ever again. Like,
I hope not. Maybe Deadpool 3.
Maybe. Only
Deadpool makes sense of it.
But I think we're seeing with superhero narrative where people are starting to see, at least in the movie sphere, where they are going with smaller stories.
Yeah,
you look at Joker, you look at Logan, you look at you're seeing the genre taken into spheres it normally isn't taken into. Like Logan was a Western.
Oh yeah.
You would have never combined superheroes and Westerns until you saw something like that. Now you're like, I could write that story, or I could write a story with a character like that. Until you think about it as a team movie, then you're like, I don't know how I do it as a team. But
yeah, the team movie I think definitely takes you out of that. But I think that the scoping down, I like those low power level, superhero movies and shows better than I think I like the big ones. Just because it's more relatable in some fashion. There are issues that they're dealing with. They're focused more on the human qualities of themselves as opposed to what planetoid can I deflect with my armpit today, So I don't know. It's like the big super ones. Like, I enjoyed the Avengers. It was a fun romp in time, but I find that the smaller scale shows and stories were just more compelling to me.
Oh yeah. I loved what they were doing on Netflix. I hope they do something similar on Disney Plus. Since Disney Plus is going to take all my money and my time.
Of course.
And I hope that they keep, I hope that they keep this idea that stories with these crazy powerful people don't have to be about the powers. That's one of I read something about writing Superman stories and how a lot of people get caught up on the fact that Superman can do all of these things, but they don't pay attention to the fact that he's just a farm boy from Kansas. Like, he still has those fallibilities. He still has that weakness, that vulnerability, and those emotions that need to be resolved and talked about. I don't mean he needs to be mopey in Justice League, but he's the most human Justice League member, I think. Him and the Flash.
Yeah. I think actually, strangely, a show that did it the best was Supergirl. When you look at how they did Superman in that show, that was one of the best Superman ever, and it's because he wasn't the main character. So they were able to do things with him. Like, when you have a character that powerful, it's hard to write that character. Like, it really is, because you're like, well, you can't throw anything at him that's bigger or stronger than him. So everyone has to try to outthink him or outwit him, and eventually you just get to the point where you're just like, let's just talk about how he feels, because this is the best Superman stories. Is when you start getting into his head about how he actually thinks and views the world. That's where it gets interesting with Superman. That's a hard thing to do in a game that, on a tabletop setting where so many players are out to roll dice and affect the world with what they can do with their character. So that's a hard thing to do.
Yeah, and I mean it. And it's hard to let them be Superman without making them feel limited. Because I know some people who run superhero games who do the games at, correct power level, which I have never been able to wrap my head around.
That's for sure.
I've played in a couple games like that, and I felt bad being Superman when it was a Justice League Avengers crossover and Black Widow was on the table shooting guns at Thanos and Apocalypse.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm here to do work, I guess. I don't know why you're here. So
no.
usually when I'm designing my convention games, especially, I'll do like the Justice League Unlimited or Avengers Cartoon approach, where everybody's basically on the same power level, and Blue Lightning kills Superman for some reason.
Yeah, you have to, because otherwise, and we talk about this sometimes, where when you talk about a system, how there's inequity at the table, and for some people that's a bigger deal than others. But like, I think that it's when something like that comes up where the inequity really starts to show that it becomes like a real problem. And I think superhero games, even like the old Marvel game that we referenced, like there was always a large amount of inequity at the table sometimes, and it was really hard to run games in that system because of it.
It takes a lot of trust. Like, you have to trust the players at the table that they're not going to steamroll you if you pick Batman or Black Widow or Hawkeye or Green Arrow. You've got to be able to know that they'll let you have your moment, and you don't always get that when you're sitting at a table with strangers.
Yeah, especially with strangers.
Well, it's Spotlight is a lot of it too, because I mean, a big draw to the superhero genre, of course, is, you know, I am just super pimpy, I'm badass, I can do all these cool things. You know, so people, I think, are drawn specifically to the just like, let me show off how cool I am. And, you know, that's similar, I guess, to the epic tier for Dungeons and Dragons. You know, that's how many cool tricks do I got, you know? And if you do have inequity at the table and power level at that point, you know, it's, hey, let's show off our cool stuff. Oh, okay, I can do a flip, and
I brought a taser.
Yeah. I've got a utility belt. I guess it does stuff. You know, yeah. So it's a weird one for me. Like, it's you know, I don't know. I've never tried Masters and
Mastermind.
Yeah, I just totally blanked on the name there. I haven't tried that one. We obviously played the Marvel one. I was definitely not a fan of that system.
Have you ever played Champions?
No, I haven't.
We played
Mutants and Masterminds is like Champions for people who hate math.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's yeah, we really haven't done a lot of superhero gaming.
Yeah, I guess Aberrant was really the only other one that we gave a try, and we've given it a couple of tries, but those campaigns never lasted long for us. I don't know why. I mean, usually I think it was just scheduling.
Well,
it like those games, the schedules never worked out for very long. But
scheduling is the great enemy of tabletop role-playing games.
If you're ever going to be a superhero, you should definitely be schedule man.
Yeah,
just able to make a schedule work no matter what.
I think the longest running superhero campaign that we played in was probably the one that I made up the rules myself out of the D10 system when I ran you guys through that. That was probably the longest running superhero game that we probably have played.
Longest running, or just the one that felt the longest?
Yeah, probably the longest running one. Probably a little bit of both, to be honest.
Oh, good Lord. Yeah, so when we're talking writing styles, you know, obviously we're kind of getting into differences between superheroes and Dungeons and Dragons in particular. But, you know, what are the differences for you in terms of writing a novel versus writing a story for a game?
Well, the big difference is that there is, when I'm writing a story for a game, I mostly just write a beginning, and I write several living characters with strong motivations and desires. Because really, with any tabletop game, it's really just the GM presents a big beginning, the players react, I react to what they do, back and forth until the story comes to some kind of conclusion. I usually like to have a big flashy opening prepared, and I like to have a unique encounter prepared that it can build up to. But again, being flexible to react to the characters using their superpowers. I mean, you know, a superhero game might be the first game a DM sits down to write where the characters can literally juggle tanks and walk through walls and look into the past with perfect clarity and read minds. Like,
yeah,
it's hard to prepare a mystery or a challenge for that. But at least you have to let them use their powers.
At least till you know what the power sets are.
Yeah.
Like, it's not like you can sit down, roll up characters fresh, and have a game ready to go. Because you're right. Like, who knows what they're going to come up with if you're sitting at the table the first time. Like, I bet there probably is more of a need to know ahead of time what the characters are before you sit down for game session one, perhaps than fantasy.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is something I ran into when I was running Exalted. It's another one of those really high power level things where the characters are meant to be just the penultimate at things, and it was very difficult for me as somebody who likes to have challenging games to write a story where the players both felt badass and awesome and steamrolled things, but also had challenges that actually felt meaningful.
Yeah,
that
is definitely true. And that does come back to the sort of that escalation of stakes. It's a delicate balance to strike, because you want to be able to challenge them, but you want to be able to do it in an organic way that doesn't feel like it's stifling to their powers.
Yeah, tailor-made to that specific hero kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So you have to sort of challenge them in ways that their heroes aren't expecting. So like if you have a character who's really fast, hit them with somebody who's insubstantial, or something that isn't a direct counter to their power, but is something that they have to think outside the box to make that power work. And one of the really nice things about writing superhero stories is a lot of superheroes are more reactive than fantasy heroes, who are very proactive. Like in fantasy settings, the heroes are the agents of change, trying to reclaim the wilderness or topple an evil overlord. In superheroes, they're agents of order. They're members of an established society with entrenched norms that the heroes are trying to uphold, while the supervillains are trying to overthrow everything. So usually they're responding to the stimulus that you give them more than in a fantasy setting, where it's a little bit more give and take, where you're going to be, like in D&D, you're going to be reacting to what they want to do. In a superhero game, you present a supervillain who's doing something bad and they have to go stop it.
Yeah, I've always felt like the evil big bad guy or the villain or whatever is the engine of a story, in any kind of story. Usually for me, it always felt like the good people were reacting, whereas the evil was the main active force. That's interesting that you're saying that in a fantasy world, it's not necessarily that way.
Well, yeah, it's not always that way. I mean, like in Lord of the Rings, for example, they are responding to the threat of Sauron, but it's their plan. It's not a reaction to something that Sauron is doing. They found the ring and they said, oh crap, we have to destroy the ring. What are we going to do? And they come up with the entire plan, and then they enact it before any of Sauron's agents have a chance to present this problem to them.
Well, yeah, but it's
and then it cat and mouses back and forth after that.
Yeah,
until it escalates to giant war by the time it's done. But you're right; they do technically make the first step.
Yeah, I guess so. But it would be kind of like, hey, Cold War times. Hey, Russia developed the nuclear bomb first, and they've got themselves up in space, and they're ready to get the high ground.
Well, but their plan is,
you guys are going to fight back? No,
their plan is to sneak in and destroy it before Sauron ever knows what happened, though. Yeah. So I mean, they did initiate with the plan; it just didn't go their way.
Yes, it wasn't like Sauron gave the ring to Bilbo and said, "Good luck."
Right. Yeah, no, it was actually out of his hands.
And like the ring came into the forces of good after the good guys took it from Sauron, cast him down, and refused to destroy it. Like,
yeah. The flaws of men.
Yeah, so it is interesting that is. What's funny is that we consider D&D to come from Tolkien, but most D&D games I've seen are not structured that way.
No, not anymore. Definitely not.
Not at all.
Like maybe Escape from the Blood Keep with Dimension 20, but they're the bad guys trying to figure out how to get Sauron back on the throne.
So when you're writing novels, like what's your approach there? Like how do you structure your time and your creative process?
I'm a big outliner when it comes to writing novels, and I guess when it comes to writing role-playing games too. So usually I'll start with a nugget of an idea, like my novel that just came out, The Magician's Sin, back in May. It's a fantasy noir story about a drunk wizard who has decided he's going to use this upcoming magical occurrence to end his unnatural life because he's had enough. And days before this event takes place, his ex-wife gets kidnapped, and her daughter comes and asks for him to help rescue her from mobsters and monsters. And he agrees to do this before he offs himself. And then going through the process, he realizes maybe he's not ready to go yet. So that story started with the character. Anson I originally wrote his story as a coming of age teenage hero story, and I realized that wasn't the most interesting part of his life. And I wanted him to kind of jumpstart my own superhero universe. So I took that character, I moved him to a point in his life when I thought would be the most interesting for people to see, and that could lead to more stories being told. And writing the story itself, I take every scene, I write it on an index card, and I lay all the index cards out on the ground in front of me, or on the wall in front of me, if I have enough twine to look like a crazy person.
Important first steps,
Oh, yeah. And each index card has the name of the scene, which characters are involved in the scene, and basically like a one-sentence description of the scene. And I lay them out on the wall, and I start shuffling them around. I color coordinate them by plot line, too, because I'm a psycho. And that's how I build the story. I start with that skeleton, and I just start writing scenes. And as I finish the index cards, I check them off, and I put them on the pile. Until I have the whole draft finished.
That's a pretty big wall. I mean, that seems like
it is a pretty big wall. I mean, the Magician's Sin is 78,000 words, and it wound up, I think, being 40 index cards.
Okay, that's not as many as I was imagining in my head.
No. And I try to make each of my scenes between like 1,500 and 2,000 words, somewhere in there.
Gotcha.
Okay, I guess that's more. I guess
some go more, some go less.
You sit in one spot sometimes in a story for a long time when there's a lot of dialogue going on, so you can cover a lot of ground in one scene. I suppose that way.
Yeah, I guess it also depends if it's a contained scene or if something has got a lot of throwback or break up the timeline a little bit, jump around, kind of like they do in shows a lot of times.
Yeah, I do. I do use a few flashbacks that flash back to when he first became a superhero, 20 years before when he was married to his ex-wife. And each flashback scene there, the first one is them meeting, the second one is them agreeing to be superheroes, and the third one is them divorcing. So it just gives the relationship between him and his wife, just context for the reader as they're going.
Mm-hmm.
So do you feel that your style is a little more Watchmen-ish? A little more, obviously, with a lot of problems in their lives and things like that?
Yeah. All of my characters definitely have a lot of problems and a lot of personal issues that they have to work out. It's not as gritty as Watchmen from a society point of view. Just because I'm not quite as cynical as Alan Moore.
Yeah. Especially if you've seen the new stuff that I just tried to watch.
It's hard to be more cynical than Alan Moore.
Yeah, right.
It's not like that's a bar you were expected to hit, but
right. Guess I better get down.
You do feel the need to. Every character has to have that tragic backstory, right? Like you have to.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I don't think there's any way around that one. That's just a requirement for superpowers.
Yeah, nobody ever gets to be well adjusted.
Nope. Hey, everything's great. I have a great family. They're all still here. They love me, and I dress as a bat and I break people's collarbones every night. I have well-adjusted behavior. It
is the one thing that it's a guilty pleasure of mine, but I sadly appreciate about Teen Titans Go is that they make them the most well-adjusted people that just hang out on their couch watching TV until a siren goes off and then they go run into action. But the whole episodes, they don't ever use their powers for anything important. They're just hanging around making sandwiches, and so that's what it boils down to, right? Though at some point, if you're gonna have them be well-adjusted people, that's what your game ends up looking like.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I did see Teen Titans Go to the movies, and that was actually hilarious.
It's actually really well done, but it is a lot of them doing nothing important. So the moment you scale the power down too much and you get people with powers, that's exactly what they're doing with their time is what you see in that cartoon.
Oh, I know I wouldn't be a superhero if I had superpowers in the real world.
You just hang out your ass and be like, no.
Yeah, I wouldn't be a villain, but I'd be comfortable.
You're gonna be all right. It's interesting. You were talking about kind of the structure there of the flashback scenes and stuff being pretty useful in a storytelling device. That's something I've always been interested in introducing more of in tabletop. And, it would seem like a superhero game would really be ripe for that
I've done it a couple times.
Did it go well?
Yeah, it went really well. So in one of my ongoing campaigns, I had a character who was a post-cog, so she could see the past with perfect clarity.
That helps.
And one episode of the game, she looked into the past, and I said, okay, she's going to look into the past for a long time and get this information. But next week, I'm going to show up with a bunch of Silver Age superheroes, and you guys are going to go ahead and play through the scenario to see what she saw.
That's cool.
So,
yeah, I do like that idea of just, I mean, I guess you really have to be careful with how you've laid the groundwork ahead of time. You know, like, are there any things that are going to be dependent on the outcomes of this scene? Should I leave it nebulous? You know, have I already hammered out what the result is? You know, like, but it is really cool to have those scenes where players get to kind of discover with you what's going to happen.
Yeah, and I always, if I can do something with gameplay instead of a cutscene, I always do that. I think that is the best way to go about it. I don't think anybody likes listening to the DM ramble on for a long time.
Yeah, it's interesting in those situations because, you know, oftentimes the player will be in a position where they're playing a character that they're not invested in, you know, and trying to actually develop some kind of, well, I mean, investment is a word, but, you know, trying to come up with a reason why they can get in the head of that NPC and the motivations and, you know, actually
building a relationship with them.
Yeah.
And in an ongoing campaign scenario, it helps if these characters are NPCs that they have interacted with before.
Yeah, good point.
Like in my scenario, when they were playing the Silver Age characters, they knew some of those people as retired superheroes, or some of those superheroes were their mentors or their parents. So there was that sort of built-in relationship between them. In a situation like, I'll run convention games set in the universe of my novels, and I'll have the characters from the novel as the player characters, and it's hard to... One of the challenges is getting people who've never read the book to be interested in the characters and to know how the characters play and act. And I don't dictate to them that this is how this character would act. What I do is I give them just a role-playing aid if they want to play the character a certain way. That just has like 4 words that are adjectives I would use to describe them, and their opinion of the other superheroes in the group.
Huh. That's clever.
So like, one character I've got, like, she's snarky, she's aloof, she's free-spirited, and she secretly cares a lot. And then her opinion of the other characters in the group.
Yeah, that really changes how they're going to react to that character after the flashback, you know, because, you know, they may have cared about that NPC to some degree, but once they actually have to play that NPC and experience a day, you know, in their life.
Once they start taking hit point damage.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even just making interesting choices and like interrelationships and conversations and things that have some resonance. Then you come back to, I'm assuming, you know, the real time, and then maybe you talk to that NPC and something kind of comes up that's a little bit of a nice callback or something, you know, kind of ties it through to that player.
Yeah, I just thought of another trope that shows up in superhero stuff all the time, but doesn't show up as often in fantasy games, I should say. Splitting the party.
Oh, sure.
Well, that happens all the time. You're just not supposed to in a fantasy game, but it still happens.
But superheroes, hey,
they split up all the time. And how you handle it is, I have not always succeeded at handling it, but I think I finally have some kind of control over it. And Heroes Incorporated, I, like 4 episodes from the finale, I was like, okay, guys, we're going to do sort of like a BioWare situation where you guys are going to make a choice now. And it's going to, if you go on this path, these 2 other paths are going to get neglected and something's going to happen. Like there's going to be consequences. And they're like, okay, we'll just split up and have 2 of us go do each of them. And
go ahead.
Yeah. Sorry, and I was like, oh, okay. That's going to be really boring on Twitch when 4 of you guys are just sitting there for the whole session. So what I did was I did each choice as an episode, and I had the other player characters play NPCs who were allies of the group or were people who would have been invested in that situation. I had the players play them, and I did 3 sessions, 1 for each split.
Nice.
And then they met up at the end, like an end game.
Huh. Yeah, that's a good approach. It kind of reminds me of Wraith the Oblivion, the White Wolf game, where there were scenes that were, like whenever your character went through like a harrowing, and the other players had to play, the I can't remember what the term was, like the shadow beings essentially that tormented that character in the scene.
Oh yeah, your shadow.
So you got to actually go in there and actually have a role to play, even though it wasn't your character or anything like that. So
yeah, I love stuff like isolation. That. I really love when players are cool and let other players play the NPCs in their lives.
Yeah, that's.
I think you have to be with a group that's played together a lot to usually get that sort of interaction between.
It takes
players.
A lot of trust.
Yeah, it's a lot of trust, and it's also a lot of respect. Like if somebody takes the time and the effort to really make that work, to actually go in there and play that character well, in a meaningful way.
We do have a question coming in from Stoneflash. It says, how does leveling up work? Do your powers get stronger? Do you learn new powers?
Yeah, so in Mutants and Masterminds specifically, it's a point buy system. And you build your powers with a certain amount of points. Mm-hmm. You can, as your power level goes up, you can increase the numbers of your powers, but you can also build alternate effects to your powers using your points, which are basically creative applications of your powers that you didn't have before. Like if you're a waterbender, you can have a power that basically lets you throw water balls, but you could also like put a dome of water around somebody's head and suffocate them. Mm-hmm. Or if you're a utility belt character, you could say, hey, I've come up with this new gadget that I've gotten, my bat helicopter, it's bat shark repellent, so I'm going to go use that real quick. It's a really flexible system because it doesn't focus so much on the names of your powers as it does what the power does. Mm-hmm. You go by the effect, and you can basically describe how you achieve that effect anyway. So, like Batman, Green Lantern, and Zatanna all have different ways of tying people up, but they're all still a snare power. It doesn't matter if it's a bolo, if it's a ring, if it's a spell. The effect is what matters.
Looks like the question Stonefly has here is, as they take damage, do your powers decrease then? I'm not very familiar with point buy.
So, as you take damage, your powers don't decrease, but you do become less effective at using them. Basically, whenever you get hit, you roll a toughness check versus the effect of the power. So if somebody hits you with a power that has a DC 25, you roll a toughness check, you roll a 24. You don't pass, you take what's called a bruise, which means you get -1 to all subsequent toughness checks for the rest of the fight. That's sort of how smaller characters whittle down big characters. If you get 6 to 10 less than the DC, you take a bruise and a daze. So 1 bruise, and then you can only take a standard or a move action that round. So you can either move or you can attack, basically. If you take 11 to 15, you take a bruise and a stagger, which means you're dazed for the rest of the fight. And if you get staggered twice, you get knocked unconscious. And then if you get a 16 to 20, you're just flat out knocked out.
Gotcha. So there is that slugfest kind of component, but then there's also this, like, if you get really jacked, you're going down quick.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And it's all relative to your power level. So power level 10 is the base power level for games starting out with Mutants and Masterminds. Your power level, you double that, and that sort of determines the trade-off for a lot of things. So, like, if you are really tough, you're easier to hit. And if you're really hard to hit, you're easier to hurt.
Gotcha.
So, like, the Flash, you hardly ever hit him, but when you hit him, it hurts real bad. Yeah. But somebody like the Hulk doesn't care about getting hit, and he's harder to hurt. And you can build your character however you want. Those trade-offs are sort of where it is. So your trade-offs are also for your to hits and your damages. So the more likely you are to hit, the less likely you are to do massive amounts of damage.
Gotcha. Now, so these are all on a slider like that? Like, so specific elements are pit against each other, or is it just like they're a grab bag of things that could offset each other?
So specific elements are offset.
Gotcha.
Fortitude and will, so your ability to resist poisons and diseases is offset by your ability to resist mind control. Your dodge and your parry, those go together. Those are your armor classes, so to speak. Dodge for range attack, parry for close attack. Those are offset by your toughness, which is just your general ability to shrug off damage.
Gotcha.
And then what I really like about it is you can create just about any power using your points. There's like 100 power effects in the book that you can build your powers off of. Each of them has a flat point value, and then you can add extra things on them to increase the amount of points each rank costs.
Gotcha.
And you can rank your powers up to twice your power level, generally.
So you're saying
talk to your GM first.
So you're saying power level 10 characters. What is that in scale of heroes we may know?
So if you're going based on Green Ronin's DC Adventures book, which is sort of their iconic versions of the DC characters. A power level 10 is going to be somebody like a Nightwing or a Spider-Man, or trying to think of a powered person who's not quite as powerful. Those are going to be right at your regular superhero street level guys.
Gotcha.
Batman and the Flash are power level 12. Wonder Woman and Green Lantern are power level 14. Superman's power level 15. And then Darkseid's power level 16.
So 16 is kind of your cap. That's where you don't get much bigger than Darkseid. So I mean, that's about where it caps out.
That's about where theoretically you can go exponentially as high as you. But they try to cap out at power level 16. You do get a couple characters who are what they call power level X, which are basically just GM Fiat characters like Mr. Mixie's at Pitlick.
Oh, true.
Or Galactus. Or
people that can
Thanos with the Infinity Gauntlet. Yeah.
Right. Who can bend reality at that point.
Yeah, just do it. It's fine.
The Dr. Fate world.
Yeah. I think he's power level 15 in the book.
Is he not quite at that high? He's one of those characters they always kind of put up there like might be outside the normal realm of power.
In the comics, I would say yes.
Yeah, but for sure.
But they put him on the Justice Society, so they couldn't make him all powerful, I guess.
Ed had to tone him down to make him interesting again, didn't they?
Always. And I mean, I love DC. I write all kinds of DC adventures for conventions and stuff. I have a Suicide Squad game that's not made up, like my one I did with Steve. I do a Suicide Squad Here Comes the Squad game where they are the Batman 66 villains protecting the Beatles on their first tour of the USSR.
I'm sorry. I'm going to need you to say that again. So you've got the 66 Batman villains protecting the Beatles on a tour.
Yes, on tour of the USSR.
And, what are you protecting them from?
Well, Amanda Waller thinks that the Soviets are just trying to abduct the Beatles, and this is like a bald-faced thing, but she doesn't want to dedicate American resources to it.
Okay, let me start again. Which eras? Is this Cold War USSR?
It's 80s? It's swinging 60s USSR.
60s USSR. Okay.
Yeah. And it's Batman 66, so it's wacky. It's not it's not like a Hunt for the Red October Beatles game.
Wow.
And the Beatles wind up getting abducted and taken into Skartaris, which is sort of like the Hollow Earth in the middle. They're taken by these reptile men because they want the world's greatest musicians to perform this specific ritual, and they leave Ringo. So Ringo winds up being a member of the Suicide Squad for that particular scenario.
Have you seen the movie where there's the Beatles don't exist, and the one guy who knows about the Beatles is trying to like fix reality by bringing the Beatles back? Like, I
haven't seen that yet. I really want to.
You should, because it sounds like that would be a perfect idea for why these supervillains are trying to actually escort the Beatles. Like they're gonna like reroute time or something. Like,
yeah, no, I really. But that game had one of the best mic drop moments for players ever. So they were going through Skartaris, and they were with Rick Flag, who is he's the handler for the Suicide Squad. And because it was the 60s, his detonator could only blow up all of their heads. He couldn't blow up individual Suicide Squad members.
Oh, yeah, sure.
And for some reason, they sent him and Ringo on ahead of them to scout out the evil sorcerer's lair and to come back to them. And they never came back. So they went in themselves. And when they got into the sorcerer's lair, he was like, "Oh, Mr. Flag, your friends are here. Press the button." And there was an audible gasp from everybody at the table.
No.
So I had them all roll initiative and go find, and they wound up not getting blown up. I probably wouldn't have ended the game with them getting blown up, but
Probably.
it was funny watching them squirm.
Best game ending ever.
Well, thanks, guys. Thanks for coming.
I'm glad you guys paid your $4 for the convention's tickets.
It was a mere 4 minutes into the session, and now I can go get my drink.
Oh, that's how you sell the most convention tickets. I don't need a 4-hour block, just 10 minutes. I just need 10. We're good.
See how fast I get thrown out.
Yeah, Fruitzilla's claiming he's heading out. This is usually when other people show up in the chat and suddenly he's back.
We've seen this sort of thing before, Fruit. We're on to you. But good night, Fruit, if you are leaving.
Yeah, good night if you are actually leaving.
I did have another really good DC game. I called it Justice League Fire Lizards and Forgotten Lairs. And they were fighting the Legion of Doom, and they interrupted Mr. Mixie's at Pitlick's D&D game with the other fifth dimensional imps. So he forced them to play with them. And I handed out D&D character sheets to the people who signed up to play Mutants and Masterminds, and they wound up playing D&D versions of their characters. Like Superman was a paladin of Paylor, and Batman was a halfling rogue.
Wow. Yeah. These all make sense to me.
We get Stonefly coming with another question. He wants to know if you're running any games at PAX.
PAX Unplugged?
Just at PAX. Is that unplugged, Stonefly?
We'll get that answer.
We'll give her a second to answer.
The delay is real.
She says yes. Yeah.
Yes, I will be at PAX Unplugged this year. I'll be running with Green Ronin specifically.
Very cool.
So I don't have my events signed up yet, but keep an eye out, and I will give you guys an update as soon as I have one.
Yeah,
excellent.
Definitely be on the lookout for that.
Have to keep an eye out for that Stonefly. It looks like he will be at PAX.
Yeah, I'm probably running a Guardians of the Galaxy game and a Justice League game. Probably.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I can't believe I hadn't run a Guardians of the Galaxy game before this year, but it's right up my wacky alley.
Well, I mean, if you like Suicide Squad, like Guardians of the Galaxy is just like basically the Suicide Squad on the right side of the law, sort of.
Yeah,
most of the time.
Just a little,
they're just slightly off. Yeah,
they don't start in prison, but they take a trip through prison on their way to where they're going. Usually,
yeah, and I mean the Guardians are just a player character group. Like,
yeah, they are.
The way they act, the way they interact with each other, the things they come up with, they think like player characters.
They are the most D&D groupish of any of the superhero squads that you can really come across. Like they got it down. Yeah. Maybe
Rocket's
the Fantastic
just a power
Four.
gamer.
Yeah. Fantastic Four might be the other one. They're the other one that maybe lends a little to the D&D tropish. If you wanted to think of superhero groups, like all share the same common origin. They all got vastly unique powers that allow them to do one specific role in the group. Like,
hey, thanks for the bits there, Fruit.
Hey, Fruit. Thank you.
You got a Terminator up in there.
Wow, where did he get a Terminator from?
That's a good question. I have no idea. It explodes and everything. Yeah.
That's impressive.
So what all cons are you going to?
So PAX Unplugged's Yukon and PAX Unplugged are the last two for this year. Yukon's in Ypsilanti, Michigan. It's a very small con, but it's a lot of fun. It'll be November 22nd to the 24th. And then PAX Unplugged I'll be at this year in December. Matinee Con is a convention I go to. Matinee, it's a small convention that's put on by the group I run events for at Origins called Matinee Adventures. They're a great group of people who always put on great games. They run Serenity, they run Seventh Sea, Conan. One guy does Gotham Central, and they're just the cops in Gotham trying to pick up after Batman.
Oh my god, that must be crazy.
That's awesome.
Like those are the sorts of stories I think would really work for me. Just like what the hell is happening around here? Like another one? Like, okay.
Yeah, I'm running Fallout at
that looks
Yukon and Origins this year. I had a whole lot of fun with Fallout last year.
Yeah,
I haven't had
crazy
the chance to
group.
play the new Fallout role-playing game that comes out. I'm playing that for the first time at Yukon.
Nice.
So MatineeCon, and then I'll be at Origins, and I'm hoping to be at Gen Con this year. We'll see how many books I sell.
Well, if you're at Gen Con, I think we're all planning on going, so we'll definitely
we'll
look you up when we get there if you happen to be around.
Yeah, I'm always around. Last year at Origins, I ran 13 events because I'm a psychopath.
Oh my god!
Yikes!
Yeah, I'm never doing that again. That was insane. That was 52 hours of role playing games, of running role playing games.
That's a lot.
That is a lot.
Good grief.
Last Gen Con, I ran around with Bob from Featherfall Tabletop, one of our other friend channels around here. And we picked up a superhero game called Tattered Capes. Have you seen or played?
I have seen it. I want to play it. I haven't played it yet, but I've seen the premise and I love it.
He's been wanting to. He was talking about getting a one shot together, so I've been keeping my eye out for when Tattered Capes one shot comes up over there on Featherfall. So if you haven't checked him out,
on the stream, let me know.
he's been wanting to. I need to get back on him again because if you haven't seen Tattered Capes, it's a world where all the superheroes become zombies. And so your player characters are the only superheroes. They're like the B team.
Or the sidekicks.
So you're not even the Justice League. You're just the sidekicks, and you have to go take down all the actual heroes who have turned into zombies.
And they still have powers and stuff?
Yeah.
Oh, God.
They're powered zombies, and you're the B team going to take them down. Like it's an amazing setting.
That sounds insane and
nuts.
I'm hoping, that I can get in on that if I see him posted up there. So
yeah, let me know. I'll be there in a heartbeat.
So
I want to play Crypto the Super Dog trying to deal with zombie Superman.
Oh my god,
that'd be amazing.
Like, what do you do at that point? Just like, there's not enough kryptonite in the world at that point,
Right, just roll over. Move. We should move to Mars.
Yep. You just call it a day. We're done with this.
I didn't get
Nobody's using it.
Flip through the book, but it looked pretty impressive. So one of those that's on my wish list of things to try out sometime.
Let's see.
So
what else we got going down here?
We were going to discuss a little about how writing kind of changes how you DM games. So can you give us a bit of a kind of before after, like your initial DMing versus like after you got into the writing, like how that's altered how you go about DMing games? Has there been like a shift because of being a writer?
There definitely was a shift. One of the big benefits I think I get from being a writer who's a DM is descriptions. I have found out how to do a lot more with a lot less words, which is always a benefit for good flavor text. You sort of get the pertinent things, you get the things that the players want to know, and you learn how to play with their expectations.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of times when people are reading flavor text, it's just, well, you walk into this 30-foot square room, there's a bed in the corner, and there's a footlocker. What do you do?
Mm-hmm.
And you can do, if you're going to use flavor text, you need to make it work for you. You need to help immerse the players with other senses. You have to tell them what it smells like, tell them what it sounds like. Do they feel this weird effervescent tingle across their skin as they cross the threshold of this magical portal? And I think it helps being a writer and being a dungeon master is with villains in particular, and coming up with characters who have strong motivations and being able to put your head inside this other person's point of view.
Make them full instead of just mustache twisty nonsense.
Yeah, which can be fun. I mean, it's fun to have a villain like that every now and then, but you don't want to build a campaign around it.
Right. So it's for your one shot, your little monster of the week that you're throwing in there as a filler game here or there before you start the next arc or whatever. Like,
well, it's just like being a player character. You don't want to be a gimmick character for 24 episodes.
Yeah.
Right. You save those ideas for your one shots. Whenever a one shot comes along, you're like, I'm going to play the gimmicky character today because it's a one shot.
Yeah. Like nobody wants to be the halfling grappling barbarian for 2 years.
No, not unless he's got a heck of a backstory attached to him.
Yeah. So building not even just stronger villains, but stronger characters as a whole, and understanding that every scene that you put into the game should contribute to the story.
Yeah, I think that's an important one for sure.
There's a lot of, you want everything you do to build the narrative. You know, you shouldn't have a throwaway fight just for the sake of having a fight, in my opinion. You want that fight to, if it is going to be just a fight without a connection to the wider story, you want to make sure it's an interesting fight.
Right.
You want to set it in an interesting place, or have your villains use interesting tactics, or make it memorable in a way that will get the players excited and talking about it.
Yeah, it's interesting because in the medium of tabletop, there are many motivations, many sources of entertainment. It's interesting because, like, from a story perspective, there are things that could happen that are just not particularly pertinent to a storyline, but maybe players will just have a good time with it. Now, do you find yourself weeding those out more so than not, or are you saying that they have a place, but most things should contribute?
They have a place, but I think that everything should contribute. Even little throwaway scenes should have some kind of wider tie to the story as a whole. Because this is your friends are trusting you with their time. Yeah. And if they're like me, I don't have a lot of free time. So choosing to spend those 4 hours with your dungeon master, it should always be contributing to the story and to the fun. Never sacrifice the fun in the name of the story.
Yeah,
for sure.
But be willing to know which fights are just going to feel like slogs. I mean, there are scenes that will not propel the overall narrative, but those scenes that don't propel the narrative forward should reveal something about the characters, or about the bad guys, or about the setting. It should, like, what I think is one of the most powerful scenes in all of film writing is the beginning of Indiana Jones. The beginning of Raiders of the Lost Ark, he's in the middle of securing this idol in a booby-trapped cave, but we don't know who hired him. We don't know if he's good or evil. We don't know anything about this guy. But we do know that he is the kind of guy who gets into daring situations, has the competence and drive to escape, and we know he's likable.
Right.
And we can see from this scene that this story is going to have intrigue, it's going to have treasure, ingenuity, and more than its fair share of close calls. So you can do the same thing with your game sessions. The adventure might not have anything to do with the meta plot you have kicking around in your head. Like the boulder never came back for revenge in Indiana Jones 3.
Missed opportunity.
If it did, though.
Right? But every scene should be exciting, ready to digest, and emblematic of the style of campaign you're running.
Right. Yeah, and I think there's something to be said about, even if it is just a fight for the sake of a fight, that you have things like maybe you're in a new environment, like a city that you want to establish as seedy and dangerous, in some capacity, and you have like the street toughs that you run into, or certain little things in the environment that you showcase as areas that are a little sketchy here and there. So like, it doesn't have to be super important, but it embeds the player into a world.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. What I'm talking about is just like, don't open the door in the dungeon and be like, oh, there's 3 kobolds here, cuz.
Yeah. There they go. Yep. Stab, stab, stab.
Yeah. Right. Like, I feel like everything should build. And that's something you learn as a writer, because if you start having scenes that don't matter in your book, people are going to put it down.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's about killing your darlings. It's about making sure everything that is there should be there. and it should have a reason to be there.
Now, what about pacing? Because we were talking a little bit about that earlier. You were talking about doing arcs. How do you deal with pacing in a tabletop experience as compared to writing in a book format?
The nice thing about pacing in a tabletop experience versus writing in a book is you have immediate feedback from the viewer, quote unquote, the reader. In a tabletop session, you have the liberty to see, all right, it's starting to drag a little bit, so pick it up. Or they're really enjoying taking this time to just sit and talk to each other and role play together, so don't get in the way of that. Let them do it.
Yeah.
There are some tricks to good pacing. A couple of things that I really value in pacing is knowing when to start a scene and knowing when to end a scene.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't always have to start a scene at the beginning of the event.
Okay.
So a lot of times, especially with convention games, I'll start the game in medias res. I'll start them in the middle of a different situation that's not related to what's going on. Like in the Fire Lizards example I gave earlier, they were fighting the Legion of Doom when they interrupted Mixie's D&D game. And I sat everybody down at the table, they picked out their characters, and I said, okay, you guys are in Metropolis. Lex Luthor has a giant laser on top of the Daily Planet Bugle build, or the Daily Planet building.
Mm-hmm.
What do you do? Roll for initiative. And you can sort of do that with Justice League characters, because everybody's like, oh, I know what the Justice League is about.
Yeah.
Right. There's no real introduction to it. You're not playing a system or a game that's unknown to the players by much.
Yeah, and don't be afraid to start a game in the middle, almost, especially if it's a first session, or if they're planning, like if your group is planning this big heist, you can skip some of the logistical stuff as long as they have handled the writing of it. You don't have to show it on screen, and you could move to the portion when they get caught.
True. Yeah.
And another big trick with pacing is varying the scenes that you're using.
Mm-hmm.
So don't do a fight. Feel free to break it up with a puzzle, or break it up with a period of interrogation or role playing.
Mm-hmm.
Variety, I think, is the biggest part of pacing.
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, you definitely have to have variety. You have to have things that keep creating new forms of tension. Because, obviously scenes require something to hang off of.
Mm-hmm.
Some kind of element that you're working around, or a challenge to overcome, or, something of that nature, even if it's interpersonal.
I think that's the pitfall that DMs fall into, is they don't know how to do pacing. So they have the tendency to then throw random encounter. Oh, we've been role-playing too long.
Yeah.
Time to throw some bad guys out there. And as you said earlier, you want all your combats to matter. You want them all to tie back into something important. So I think DMs that struggle with pacing are the ones that you see the more for no good reason random encounter, just to break up the monotony, get the action moving again. And that's all they have to hang on is throw random mobs at you.
Yeah, and I think one of the big lessons that every young DM can learn is trust that you're doing a good job.
Yeah, that's a big one.
A lot of people, especially if a long role-playing scene is going on and you're not used to that happening, or like you haven't seen that happen, they'll freak out and they'll throw a fight in, thinking that they're doing something wrong. But your players, if you tune into them, they will let you know what they're enjoying, what they're taking out of this experience.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's reading body language, it's trusting each other, and it's trusting yourself. And that's something that you have to learn, I think, over time.
Yeah, how long
it helps to hear it from people.
Yes, direct feedback is always nice.
But definitely finding that confidence in yourself to just do it.
Now, obviously, that becomes easier with a group that you're accustomed to. You kind of figure out what each person is like and what their feedback is. Do you find that that's a skill you've developed to the point where you can sit down with strangers and pick up on it quickly? Or is that something that's still a challenge for you?
I think it's something that I in particular do pretty well. And it has come from a lot of experience and a lot of playing with strangers. Like I run convention games a lot, and up until recently, I didn't recognize a lot of the people who kept coming back to my games.
Have some time to pass there and try to keep up with things over time. Yeah.
Yeah. And one thing I've learned from being on stage is never apologize before a performance.
Yeah.
Because the audience doesn't know what's going to happen.
Right.
They don't have the script. They don't have a rubric. They're not fact checking you.
Mm-hmm.
So as long as you fail with gusto, people will assume that's what you always meant to do.
Yeah. And I think that's the other thing is people are just very often surprised how much of a game session is ad-libbed or, just spun off of some tiny thing that just happened a few moments before,
Oh, yeah. Especially when the player has a better idea than you had.
Yeah. Like, oh okay. Yeah.
Now, do you feel that's still true with Heroes of the Mist where you're running Curse of Strahd? Because you're talking about a relatively well-known adventure. And even people who haven't played through the whole adventure like myself, I've been playing D&D since 2nd ed. I know me some Ravenloft. I know what technically is going down in this place. So do you feel like that's a different level of pressure then on that sort of idea?
There is a little bit of pressure, especially with a villain as iconic as Strahd.
Mm-hmm.
Before I set out to run Curse of Strahd on a stream, because I'm an idiot, I asked myself, what can I do for this that hasn't been done? Mm. Or what can I do with this that I haven't seen done as well as I think it could be done? So I took the whole module apart. I looked at every scene that was there. I looked at the plot lines, and I've done a mod on it, basically. I've sort of modified it, and I've made it my own, and I've filled in a couple of plots that I think needed fixed. Mm-hmm. One of the big things I think that the Curse of Strahd book, as it's written, needed a lot of work on is the heroes who are there feel incidental to the story.
Yeah, that's very true.
Frustrating things. Yeah,
I've seen it run through a couple times, and that is, I think you nailed it right there. Like that is my biggest problem I have with Curse of Strahd as well.
Yeah, and I set out with the player. I had to interview people to play in this game because I knew that I wanted to get it right. So I had 30 to 40 people come out who wanted to play, and somehow I had to narrow it down to 5. Which that's my least favorite part about doing a streaming show.
It's having to turn people away.
Yeah, I hate having to tell people you can't have fun with us.
Yeah,
right. I had to do that in my live game too. My game shop session. I got up to 7 players. They were inviting new people every week. I was like, okay, guys, we got to cut it out. Like, I love having all these other people, but yeah, there hits a point you got to cut it out. Yeah. Like,
and so I took those 5 players, and I sent everybody who interviewed with me. I sent them out like a 5 to 6 page document, just talking about what I want from this game and what I'm expecting from this game before they started coming up with their character concepts to pitch. And one of the things that I made all of them do was give me a reason that you're tied to Barovia other than I want to get out of here.
Right. Yeah.
Give me a character, give me something that I can tie into this setting to tie you here. Some unfinished business that you need to work out, a person who went missing that you care about. And we're only in episode 2, so it hasn't really come into play as much, but each of them is already invested in what's going on. And they matter to the story. They're going to, what they do is going to drive the action. It's not just going to be, it's not going to be a glorified escort quest, because I think a lot of the beginning of this module as it's written is just an escort mission.
Well, as I like to, the analogy I like to use for Curse of Strahd is it does not have the sharpest hook.
No.
It is more of an aquarium than it is a hook. The fish can't leave the aquarium, so they have no choice, but eventually decide to bite the hook.
Yeah, form a bottle episode, I guess.
Yeah, it's very much, I think, built that way. So that is a very interesting way of looking at it, because of all the Curse of Strahd streams I've watched, and I've watched more than I care to admit, only one of them has played post Strahd.
Oh, cool. Was that dice roll action?
No, it's a very small stream that I watched that finished that campaign finally, and they have not started anything new. So,
well,
I watched all 88 episodes.
God bless them.
88 episodes. Holy shit! Wow.
But they're the only ones I've ever seen go post Strahd. So.
Yeah, that is why it's post Strahd is such an interesting world to walk into because he is so vital to the story.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that's another one of those escalation of stakes things where
what do you do post Strahd? Right.
I've got another big bad that's behind Strahd that I'm sort of teasing in these first few episodes, so the heroes and the audience know that there is something beyond.
That's cool.
Him. I am holding off on showing Strahd until I'm following the horror movie rule and not showing the monster right away.
Right. Yeah, that's what you got to do.
Let it build in their minds and
I want to show him in the weirdest way they can imagine.
Okay.
So that it completely throws them off guard. Like, I thought he was just like an evil, terrible monster. I thought he was going to ruin our lives. But more back to running a pre-written module, which I don't do very often. I like to write my own stuff.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Strahd is... I always wanted to play in this module because I always wanted to fight Strahd. Now I got to be Strahd, I guess, to make that happen.
Well, the good news is you get to beat him either way, right? Because ultimately you kind of want the players to at least get a chance at winning, right? But this seems like you might have it set up so there's a chance they could end up just working for Strahd. Like this
there's a chance.
Becomes like Strahd Squad is basically where you can be by the time this thing is done.
Oh man!
So I'm running this game for a group at home as my guinea pigs before I did it on the stream, so that I sort of knew what players would do. Now, each group of players is different, but they all have certain thought patterns. And they accidentally wound up working for Strahd.
I've always joking, I've never done it, but I've always jokingly said that if I ever ran Curse of Strahd, I would redo the entire module to where it has a Scooby-Doo ending, where they get to Strahd, they pull off the mask, and it's some guy from Barovia who's like the merchant down in the whole thing was a Scooby-Doo thing. The vampire part was never real. None of that was ever real. It was all funny smoke and mirrors. They Scooby-Dooed it.
Oh my god, that's the funniest part. I hope none of my players see this. I don't think they'll.
You might have a couple watching. I don't know. I've seen some names in there I don't recognize. So
this is where you guys
be careful with spoiler territory if you're.
I think all the people that I'm worried about are asleep right now. So
perfect.
There's Strahd has an alter ego in the module that he runs around as.
Right.
And I modified him so that he runs a shop in town. And he's been a quest giver and a confidant for them for the last couple of weeks. And the one player character is falling in love with him as this merchant.
Whoops.
And there's a moment in this town when political rest takes over and they're supposed to pick like one of two bad options to rule over the town. Well, they killed those two options and they put him in charge, the merchant. So they made Strahd the ruler of the town that they were worried about Strahd taking over.
Ooh. Now that is an interesting twist.
Yeah. And because of his relationship with this player character, Strahd's like reevaluating who Tatiana is. And like he basically said bye to Irina, and he's decided that this player character is the reincarnation of his love. So she's in love with him as the merchant, and he is pursuing her as the vampire. And she's going to be so heartbroken when she finds out.
It's really fascinating though, because that's gonna really dig hard, in a way that the pre-canned system may not have.
Right, and anybody if any of you have any idea of what the module is, that's not in there, so they're not gonna realize where it's coming from. So, and I think that's what you have to do with modules, especially one that's been out for a while, like Curse of Strahd, that's been ran quite a bit. Yeah,
it's so iconic. I mean, they say it's the best one that Wizards has put out for 5th edition. I don't think I disagree. I think there is room for improvement, but I think there's always room for improvement.
Sure. Just because I think all the modules have to be written from that generalist approach.
Yeah, that's one of the hardest parts about writing for tabletop RPG companies is that you have to sort of table your instinct to personalize things for your players and make it so you can put those threads in that DMs can pick up on if they want to, but also know that some DMs are just going to chuck out whole parts of your idea and whole parts of your canon because they don't like it.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you just have to, if you're going to write a module or if you're going to write for a game company in those regards, I just think you have to approach it from the idea that you're not providing a story, you're providing tools,
right?
And a blank canvas to a degree. And maybe to a degree, a picture frame to frame it with when it's done.
Yeah, no, that is.
And then they're going to paint the rest of it.
That was the biggest transition when I started freelancing for gaming companies. Was I fill everything out so much, and that's an instinct I have to hold back on whenever I work with particular companies.
Now, I have another friend who's running Curse of Strahd right now in the most bizarre way possible. He's not running with D&D. He's running it with a completely different game. And
that sounds fun.
He name dropped Barovia, and his players I don't think even flinch. Like I don't think any of them even know about Barovia, so I don't even think they know what they're in for yet. It's a complete. He's run it with Zweihander. It's amazing watching it go down because they're.
Oh my god!
They have no idea what they're in for, and they're dealing with these things, and it's completely.
They're in for a bad time. That's what they're in for.
Yeah, they are. They're in for a real bad time. So
seems like that'll work.
It's fun to watch that. It's fun to watch that game go down. Just
that's a gritty system for Barovia.
It is. It's a very gritty system for Barovia. So I'm excited to see where it goes.
Oh my god, that's amazing! I'm excited for that. When are they running that? I want to go check that out.
It's on YouTube. There's 11 episodes out. It's Defenders of Kobold. You can find DM Chuck wrote on that. It's pretty good stuff.
I will look that up. That's god, that sounds awesome.
He's been on the show and he wants to come back on here with us some other time for Wisdom Check. So maybe we'll have him
give him another shot at it.
About some of that when he gets a little further into the game. But
we'll come talk about Strahd. It'll be fun.
Yeah, absolutely. So you were saying earlier about putting together these kind of module ideas. One thing that I think would be kind of interesting is if you had the writers for the official modules coming in and actually doing a game session, running their own campaign in some kind of format that people could watch, like a YouTube videos or whatever. Just not necessarily to say this is what the module is, but here is an example of what I kind of intended, and how I would play it.
Yeah, Chris Perkins does that with Curse of Strahd on Dice Camera Action.
Yeah.
Which I really enjoy Chris Perkins as a dungeon master. I like watching him work, and I like the changes that he makes to the story in the module itself, even though he was the head writer for it.
Yeah, it's an interesting concept, isn't it?
I think writers do that a lot, though, right? Like, don't you get done writing something, you look back at it, you're like, I could totally do this better, and you start rewriting it again.
Yeah, especially my tabletop role-playing game stuff. Like, I do a lot of prep for conventions, but if I introduce the first scene and the players go off on a completely different tangent, I let them go. I'm like, that's better than what I wrote, so we're going to go do that instead. Yeah. And then maybe we'll try to rope them back in to, towards some kind of conclusion. And in a convention game, you get a lot more. There's a little bit more acceptance of railroading, quote unquote.
Sure. Yeah.
I don't know that I agree with the criticism of railroading because I think ultimately all gaming is railroading. It's just where you have the rails.
Yeah, I could see it to a degree what you mean. I think with a convention game, because you're sitting down for what is effectively a one shot, I think anytime there's a one shot, the rails become pretty clear.
Yeah, one-shot territory, I agree.
I think in one-shot territory, nobody cares if they're railroaded.
Yeah.
I think most people sit down knowing they're going to be railroaded and they could care less. I think a lot of times it's people wanting to learn a new system they haven't played before, so they need to be railroaded to a degree, or two, they just want to have a good time and they're pulling out this quirky character they've had in their head for a long time, and this is the only time they're going to get to use it sort of deal. So
yeah. Or if you're running a superhero game, one of the nice things is you finally get to play a character you've always wanted to play but have never had an opportunity to. That's
right. When
I first started running DC games at conventions, I would bring 75 Justice League members just so people could play whoever they wanted to. I had 75 Justice Leaguers and I think 48 Suicide Squad members for my original games.
Holy cow.
I quit doing that.
Yeah, that seems like a lot of work.
Then you get that one Marvel guy who sits down. He's like, I don't see Spider-Man in here anywhere.
I knew you were going to say Spider-Man.
Oh god. Well, that is interesting because there's a lot of people coming into comics that don't have a background in comics, and you're obviously going to gravitate towards the ones that are in the movies these days,
Yeah, for sure.
Like, I would say in our group, I may be the least comic book guy. Like, I watched X-Men, that was the cartoon,
Maybe Cameron. I don't know if he's...
Yeah, he was big in DC. He was a Batman guy. Yeah,
that's right. He was a Batman guy. But yeah, probably is you then.
Yeah, I mean, I enjoyed him. I just never really got into him very much as a kid. It's strange. Surrounded by lots of comic book folks.
Yeah, no, I grew up. My earliest memories was my mom got me and my brother a TV in our room, and we would stay up past our bedtime to watch the old Adam West Batman show. It came on like every night. So we would turn the TV back on after we were supposed to have it off and go to bed. And we'd watch Batman, then we'd turn it off, go to bed. So, I mean, from real young age, always watching those sorts of things. The '90s X-Men cartoon on Saturdays. Watch that thing religiously, No,
I still every time that theme song comes on, I still headbang. It's amazing.
I really want them to redo that when they redo X-Men. I want that song to somehow make a comeback.
Oh, I hope so. I'm sure Marvel will do it. I'm sure Disney will do it. I'm sure Disney will do it.
Bring that song back, right? They'll buy whatever company owns the rights to that thing, no problem.
Yeah, what was the comic that really got you into comics?
Well, the comic that I read that really told me that comics were a medium that I needed to pay attention to was Superman, All-Star Superman by Grant Morrison.
Okay.
It's a graphic novel, but that was the first one I read where I was like, I definitely need to be paying attention to this.
What was it about it that really hooked you?
It was, I guess I'm just morbid, maybe, but
okay.
What I appreciated about it was that Superman, he got sun poisoning and he was going to die. And the whole graphic novel was about him preparing the earth for when he's gone. And it's a lot of small vignettes of Superman doing these extraordinary things that are very human. Like that's the issue that has the iconic moment of him talking somebody jumping off a building. And just holding them. And it was, I don't know, there's something about that story that I think the art was necessary. I think that's one of the big things that's a big hurdle I had to overcome with comic books when I was growing up, was I was always interested in reading the words but not looking at the pictures, which I know is not normal.
I think I was in the same boat. Yeah.
And I didn't, I mean, I love art now, but it wasn't something that I developed as a kid. But that was a mature story that dealt with a theme that I worried about a lot as a young person. Was
I was going to ask you, how old were you when you picked that comic up?
I was only like 14 or 15.
Okay, so pretty young to be thinking of like an end of life kind of story.
Yeah, I don't know. Ever since I was a kid, I've been obsessed with either living forever or having a good legacy. I don't know what's wrong with me. I think it's a mental disorder.
No, I think it's a pretty common thing that people worry about. I mean, it's ultimately the one mystery that everyone's concerned about.
I think as you get older, it becomes more important to you.
Well, sure, yeah.
Obviously. So it's interesting to hear you start at that at like 14, though. Like it's a young age to think that way, but
yeah,
I gravitate towards something like that.
My dad told me I was named after Alexander the Great when I was a kid. And like by the time I was 14, I was like, well, Alexander the Great started taking over the world by the time he was 20, and he was dead at 33. So I'm halfway there if I do things the way I'm supposed to. I don't know. I had this weird nihilistic cyclical way of thinking. I don't worry so much about it anymore. Or at least I've moved the goalpost beyond 33.
Yeah, 33 is a tough number. Yeah, that comes up quick.
Yeah, it is.
It's kind of strange though, because there's a lot of big people and cultural stories that that 30 is kind of that number, 33 in particular.
Yeah, Jesus and Alexander the Great.
Yep. It's weird to think of that. Like, whoops, I've missed that one already.
Yeah, I definitely relate to the story of Julius Caesar at 30 conquering Gaul, being like, well, Alexander the Great conquered the whole world, and he was dead by now, so I'm a failure.
Yeah, it's tough, not measuring against other people's expectations or experiences and things, but
yeah. And I think it was a weird thing to be worried about when I was young, but I don't know, there's a reason that the dedication in my book is to Virl Thomas. It's your fault I'm like this.
So do you feel like any of that reflects out your characters then? Like you have this wizard you were talking about earlier, like do you feel like those kind of things bleed into him?
Yeah, that story definitely that kind of story, that kind of trope definitely resonates with me. I really like Dark Knight Returns, not because I like Frank Miller, but because it's Batman looking back and trying to do one last great thing. I love stories like, especially that's why I like Logan so much.
Right.
Logan was so good.
And like my character in Smuggler's Run right now, that's the Star Wars stream we're doing over at Geek Unleashed. I'm a retired clone trooper who's trying to die in glory in the new Galactic Civil War.
Yeah, those are it is fun to see what people do with the clone trooper concept for characters that are technically you think of as throwaway. Like there's been so many good stories they pulled out like that of what has happened to these clone troopers like by the time the rebellion comes around. So
well, I mean, there's sort of stories that resonate with people. I mean, some of what you're talking about now is, imposter syndrome is probably a component of that. But then, with these clone trooper things, it's very easy to look at society and say, like, yeah, I'm just one of many. What makes me special? How am I different than a drop of water in an ocean? And those sorts of stories, I think it just touches anyone out there who reads. I mean, it's a universal story. So, I mean, the Clone War kind of character, it's fascinating. That's an option because, it's just an open canvas.
Because it's the complete opposite end of the spectrum of a superhero. Superheroes already have something special about them. They can lift a tank, they can shoot I-beams, whatever. So that's where it's really hard to take something like that kind of concept and rope it into a superhero story. Like it's easier to tell with a clone trooper because it almost is. Yeah, it almost has to be part of that story for them. But with something like a superhero, it's a lot harder to do when you're already able to do crap most normal people can't do.
Well, yes and no, because at a certain point, if you're identifying with your power set, there's an entire you-ness that is missing. And so it's, am I special or is my power special? So I think you still have it. It's deflected. It's obfuscated a little bit.
Yeah. It's like every person in a relationship who has money.
Yeah.
I guess it depends on the origin of the powers. If you're like a mutant, you're born with it, then it's just part of you. If you're someone that had a freak accident happen like Fantastic Four, then yeah, I guess you could say they come from some other place then, I suppose. I guess it depends on the origin of your powers in those cases. But
yeah, I think that money issue that's a good one to kind of encapsulate that concept. It's a weird one, it's because ultimately that's what comics are about from what I can tell is, telling the story of a person dealing with some aspect of being a human, it's coming of age or grappling with anger or, dealing with, insecurity or whatever, vengeance.
And definitely modern day comics. I mean, there was a lot of DC's history, there was a lot of mythologizing and being the modern myths instead of the humanization, which I think is something that Marvel does really well. And I think it's something that DC's learning how to do.
Why X-Men was always my favorite comic series, was always X-Men, because that is the core of what they are, is that coming of age, oh crap, this happened to me. What does that mean for me now? Sort of stories.
How do I cope?
Right. More so than the Avengers, or the Avengers were more along the lines of Justice League. But
yeah, no, I love Spider-Man.
I
don't know if you guys have played the new Spider-Man game on. No, I guess it's not new anymore, but on PS4. That was one of the best Spider-Man stories that I have seen in a long time, and I think it was because Spider-Man finally felt like my generation Spider-Man. like the things he was going through. I was like, I have had this exact conversation with a woman. He was talking to Mary Jane over text, and she sent him back a K after he like poured his heart out. And I was like, I feel you, Peter Parker.
Yep.
I feel you every day.
that was what I love so much about Into the Spider-Verse. That was so amazing because they really covered that whole spectrum of like how very different Peter Parker can be from one telling to the next. And that failed old fat Peter Parker is like the best. Like that's the one that just really nails what, in my opinion, what Peter Parker really kind of is. Like,
I was like, I'm in this picture and I don't like it. Can I report this, please?
Yeah, pretty much. That is how it goes.
Yeah, but I love when superheroes are. I love when they're human. I appreciate the mythology. I appreciate that. I think one of the big reasons they resonate so much with modern audiences is because they have that element of mythology that I think a lot of us are missing in our lives. Yeah. I think a lot of people don't have that magic in their life, that willingness to just be and to take joy in something that's bigger than us, that's more fantastic than us. But they also have that human element where we can relate to them. You know, there's a reason there's so many BuzzFeed quizzes that are which Avenger am I, because they have such distinct personalities, and you can see yourself in each Avenger, but in one Avenger in particular, or one MCU character in particular.
Yeah, the mythology aspect is fascinating because I think you're right that our modern day mythology is, you know, characters from movies and comics and stories of these sorts of natures. There's like, I mean, the mythology's always been with us in that hero structure. You know, like what is the penultimate qualities that I should be aspiring towards? You know, what are the challenges that, you know, encapsulate the hardness of everyday life, you know, to make it special, you know. And it seems like we've talked about this concept a lot, where it ebbs and flows depending on what's happening in the world, you know, whether you want humanization or if you want mythology in your heroes. You know, if it's, you want the inverse of whatever seems to be occurring at the time, you know.
That's how you get has been washed up Thor. Oh yeah. When you take literally mythos and turn it into deadbeat washed up Thor. Like that's how you get there.
I love Dad Bod Thunder God.
How could you not, right? I mean, finally a hero I truly relate with.
But I was glad they didn't make him skinny at the end.
Yeah. Because I mean, those stories I think were actually always there. They were just told to a different audience and a different era, and so like that vibe was always there. You know, like the hero that lost their way, you know, and then redeems themselves. Like that trope is always there, but in today's telling, it's the dad bod Thor, you know?
Well, I think we went through a phase in the 90s where anti-hero was the thing. So there was a lot of redemption stories in the 90s of guy who's not so good, who's now good, maybe not going to be good again in the future, but for right now, he'll be good for a while. Like,
does bad things.
I think, the 90s was kind of full of the cool kid in the back and the jacket, the mohawk, who rebels against the system sort of characters.
A lot of black leather.
Yeah, a lot of black leather.
A lot of pouches.
Yeah. You got to have mini zippers, lots of pouches,
and zippers.
Excess belts, you know.
And I mean, there is a place for that. I mean, we've had anti-heroes since the Victorian era, and probably even before that, but they didn't call them that until then.
Their popularity circles in and out. Now they're villains. When those same characters show up now, they're actual villains. Yeah, they don't let them hang out with the heroes long.
Except in The Boys.
Except in The Boys. Yep, there's still occasionally those times where they do show back up again.
Yeah, but he's really the hero of that story. The heroes are the bad guys.
Yeah,
that's the trick.
I'll have to check that out. I don't know what you're talking about, but
The Boys. Oh, yeah. That's fantastic.
What is it?
I read the comic before I even knew there was going to be a show, and it's like The Watchmen with a tongue in its cheek.
Yeah, yeah. Just imagine if I made an entire group of superheroes, Jeff, in a D&D type setting game. It's pretty much all my characters in one show.
Okay, Fair enough. Well, somehow we have actually filled our time slot already.
We do have a few
We are
announcements we got to make here to close out our show. So we'll go ahead and let our guests start. So why don't you go ahead and plug all the things where people can find you in the coming weeks? I know you got a couple of games you're in and running.
Yeah,
so let us know what you're doing.
So you can find me, if you want, on Geek Unleashed on Twitch on Monday nights and Wednesday nights. I DM Heroes of the Mist if you want to come and hang out with me in Strahd and sunny Barovia. That's at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And on Wednesday nights, I play Mick, the retired clone trooper, on Smuggler's Run, a Star Wars podcast.
Nice.
And you can find me on Twitter at AlexanderWright3.
And as these things go, our internet crapped out at this point. But it's okay because it was at the end of the session. So if you'd like to keep us company in the future, come join us again on Monday nights on twitch.tv/TT2KB at 10 p.m. Central Standard Time for more of our wonderful talk show. And we'll have some great guests. The next one up is The Liching Hour, who is a unique experience I hope you guys will enjoy. If you'd like to keep us company on our other content, you'll find Dustin doing a Zui100 game on Thursday nights, also on the same channel. And you can find out more info about our current guest here at alexanderwrites.com. And if you like Let's Plays and you're a fan of those, you can find some of my own content on YouTube at Rain Survives. So enjoy, and I'll catch you next Monday.